Hello and welcome to On the Trail with Miles James Dean. Prior to the start of my journey on horseback, I had spent a great deal of time researching the topic of black men and women who had contributed to the exploration, expansion, and settlement of the United States. I had read several books and magazine articles and planned the interviews and conversations with the historians across the country. But there are those unwritten narratives, those personal and intimate conversations that can reveal and capture the heart and soul of an individual that books can't shed light on. And one of those encounters came in New Mexico. So pull up a chair, and I'll be right back. I traveled on Route 85, leaving out of El Paso, Texas, en route to Las Cruces, New Mexico, and within an hour I came across the three state monument, an historical landmark identifying the international boundary where the state of Chihuahua, New Mexico, the state of Texas, and the state of New Mexico came together. Here's a picture of that marker. From that point, it would be another 40 miles to the veterinarian clinic on Valley Drive in Las Cruces, New Mexico, where I would have a health checkup done on the horses, Sankofa and Sunny, and where we camped for the night. It was the next morning that I met Steve, a local rancher who, out of curiosity, began a conversation with me and shared a most intriguing story he had been told years ago about two cowboys, one white, whose name was Lee Rice, and the other a black cowboy whose name he didn't know, and how they had worked cattle drives together in the New Mexico Territory back in mid to late 1800s. It recanted a tale of trust, brotherhood, and friendship, and he told it with such personal sincerity that it seemed he was symbolically talking about himself and I. And after listening to his story, we both felt a little choked up as we said goodbye. Later that evening, as I thought more and more about the characters in his story, I remembered reading about the Goodnight Loving Trail through Texas and New Mexico, and about the reenactment of the Goodnight Loving story as told in the 1985 Western novel and then movie entitled Lonesome Dove, in which actor Danny Glover played the cowboy Joshua Dietz. I began scrolling through a couple of the books I had brought with me until I finally found what I was looking for. I sent an email to Steve suggesting that the black cowboy in his story was Bose Ickard. And I'll read to you in part one of the emails he wrote back to me 7 months later. His email read, Dear Miles, I've decided to write an article for the Range magazine about Bose Ickard and Lee Rice, and I want to share it with you before submitting the article. Now here's the thing. The main heading of his article was entitled Ickard and Rice, the Forgotten Partnership, and there were several paragraphs with a few additional subheadings such as The Drive, and then another entitled From Slave to Trusted Friend on Horseback. And then the last section was entitled The Ickard-Rice Connection. Now, his entire article highlighted the relationship, friendship, and trust that Lee Rice had in Bose Ickard because On one of the several cattle drives that they had done together, Lee had taken ill, and Bose Ickard, all alone, drove the cattle into Mexico from Texas, saving the cattle and the investment that both of the men had made. Those cattle were the cattle that eventually led to Lee Rice having a larger herd of cattle and his ranching success. In Steve's article, he also accredited me for giving him the name of Bose Ickard and his subsequent research that he began, including meeting with the only descendant of Ickard. And that is what spearheaded the writing of his article. By the way, Steve was a white cowboy rancher. This was December of 2010, a couple of years before I moved to live in South America, where I stayed for over a decade. I still have all his emails. In fact, I have all the emails I received while on the Journey ride in 2007 and 2008, which are instrumental in helping me to piece together the narratives for the podcast in each state. Unfortunately, I did not have access to those emails until later, after the ride. Recently, I decided to do some research to see if indeed the article Steve wrote was ever published. And in fact, I found his article online, published in the Rain Magazine's 2011 spring edition. Steve was not my first personal encounter with a white person who shared some knowledge of black cowboy history with me, and it wouldn't be my last while on the journey. To think that many whites don't know about black history is a misnomer. After all, much of my own research came from books written by both black and white historians. Bose Ickard may not have been acknowledged in the classroom textbooks, but he was certainly known and given his props in the state of Texas. He was honored with a Texas historical marker marking his grave. In 1979, he was inducted into the Texas Trail of Fame. Again, in 1999, he was inducted into Hall of Fame Great Westerners, a National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. And in 2002, the Bose Ickard Elementary School in Weatherford, Texas, was named in his honor. It appears that all of these honors were bestowed upon Bose Ickard before Wikipedia began referencing him in the year 2010. I'm intrigued by the number of documentaries and movies that have been produced after Mr. Beauchamp, a black cowboy who rode from Texas to Maryland, and then myself after finishing my ride from New York to California, that have been produced. And although our history is much more than a Western epic, that era still resonates and fascinates us all. And men like Bose Ickard established relationships with his white counterparts that were built on a good work ethic, moral character, and his belief in equality. And they garnered the respect of white cowboys who rode alongside them. And I can only hope that our film producers and directors continue to showcase their legacy and those qualities. I did find another YouTube clip from 2014 featuring Bose Ickard, and I'll post a link to that video clip down below. Also, in my last episode, I mentioned that a package was waiting for me in Las Cruces by a sender whom I had contacted while riding through Texas. It turned out that while riding through Arkansas, my driver and I were invited to have breakfast at a local restaurant, and while inside, a news reporter and his camera crew had assembled outside and were waiting for us to come out. The usual questions were asked about the reason I was riding across the country, and the usual responses were given. Then the cameraman began to film the activity of my preparing for the day's ride, and off I went. It was not until I was in West Texas that I received a phone call from a friend who said that he had just seen a commercial advertisement featuring my horses. To be specific, the commercial showcased the feet of Sankofa and Sonny as they were being unloaded from that trailer back in Arkansas. And on their feet were boots wrapped around their hoofs. Yes, these were the boots that I had been using to protect that one big toe on each foot as they walked and loped over 5,000 miles of smooth, rough, and hard surfaces. Here's an image of that boot. As Gomer Pyle would say, surprise, surprise. And you can imagine my surprise to see the boot company whose products I had been purchasing well before the journey began, using an interview filmed in Arkansas featuring Sankofa and Sonny, my horses, without my consent and compensation. I mean, back in the late 90s, my horses were featured in a few music videos. One of them was in a music video with Foxy Brown, and there was this music video by the Fugees entitled Everyone Wants to Be a Cowboy. Take a look.
Ole! Yeah. Everyone wants to be a cowboy. Grab your gun, boys. Ole! Ole! Everyone wants to be a cowboy. Grab your gun, boys. Ole!
In each of those videos, I was compensated for the use of my horses and felt that this time should be no different. So I contacted the company. The company was agreeable enough to do the right thing and donated several pair of Easy Boots to my journey, sending the package to a post office in Las Cruces, New Mexico. In fact, they sent me enough boots to finish the ride and then some. Before we left out of New Mexico, we had another one of those hiccups, but this time it wasn't an awning that was broken, as it was in Abilene, Texas. This time, it was a side window on the horse trailer, and to our good fortune, it happened while staying at the ranch of Brandy and Robert. And Robert just happened to be skilled at replacing RV windows. Now, not to be outdone, New Mexico has its deserts as well, and here's a pic of me riding on Sonny across the Mexican desert toward Lordsburg, New Mexico, and then on to the Arizona border, approximately 200 miles away. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't give another black Texas cowboy, a businessman, his props. Here's that gentleman. This gentleman either owned or still owns a Western shop in Dallas, and who invited me into his shop while I was in Dallas and made me a pair of leather chaps and a pair of half chaps and charged me nothing. It was his gift to me for the life of me, and I can't remember the name of this store, and I wish that someone who is listening to this podcast and sees this photo would send me his information. I would be very appreciative. In the next episode of On the Trail with Miles James Dean, we will be entering the state of Arizona, the state that gave me a more precious memory than gold, and something that I would never had expected in my lifetime. So until then, pay close attention. And as always, happy trails to you until we meet again.